In 1635–6, John Souch painted Sir Thomas Aston at the deathbed of his wife. Set in an imaginary bedchamber, the painting is divided into several compartments. These offer different levels of meaning. Madeline Aston died in childbirth on the 2nd of June 1635, leaving her husband Thomas and her young son Thomas, who would himself die but 2 years later. The draped cradle, surmounted with a skull, signifies another recently deceased child. Its somber darkness, a central void in the painting. Its blackness contrasts dramatically with the whiteness of the figure of the laid-out mother who has herself died in childbirth. It is perhaps a little unnerving, if inexplicable, to find this same Madeline Aston represented a second time in the painting, appearing to be alive, elegantly seated in a posture of melancholy at the foot of her own deathbed. This curious doubling is a feature of the 16th century theory of two bodies. The natural body dies. The social body should be preserved in an elevating representation as an element in collective memory. The painting can also be read in relation to the historical concepts of the family. The body of woman is positioned iconically as the instrument not merely of procreation, but of dynasty. Madeline's body was the point of passage between Sir Thomas Aston and his offspring, a prospective Sir Thomas Aston. Different bodies, same names. They would by succession keep the social body of the Aston family in a continuous present. The painting commemorates Madeline Aston's failure to repeat and thus secure this patriarchal lineage. The draped cradle cum catafalque occupies the center of the painting. It serves as the dark hinge between life and death, between the erect, masculine, symbol-laden lineage of father and son and the languid, supine, melancholic, deadly, feminine domain of life and natural death, with its secondary existence in representation only in the emblematic form of female social virtue. In July 1992, I attended a conference held to celebrate the work of Walter Benjamin, which coincided more or less with the date of his birth in 1892. A few weeks later, I was discussing this event with a friend who had not come to the conference. He had found himself by chance, on the very day of that anniversary, in Port Boo, the Spanish village in the Pyrenees where Walter Benjamin had committed suicide on the 26th or 27th of September 1940. I found myself wondering, belatedly and yet for the first time, about the detail, what I had frequently taken as a symbolic caesura in the history of critical theory, rather than a concrete event performed by and on a real body. How did Walter Benjamin die? At what time of day? What happened to his body? Like the death of Van Gogh, one of my professional stock in trades, suicide easily becomes a mythic fact. If an artist or famous writer suicides, the death functions abstractly. It is the punctuation point of critical discourse. It is the silencing of a theoretical project. It is the last brushstroke of an artistic practice. The natural, producing body ceases to. Art commemorates the social body. The work becomes even more mythological in collective memory because it is tinged by the particular nature of that passage from natural mortality to cultural immortality. My curiosity about the process of Benjamin's dying was fueled by a TV biopic about a woman named Jackie. In my generation, it's a point of honor to recall what you were doing the day Jack Kennedy was killed. His death is part of collective memory, kept alive by the uncertainty about the identity of his assassins. My sense of that death is composed of those blurred videos of the car and a photo of Jackie Kennedy in her blood-stained courage suit. TV melodrama made the physical process of prolonged dying much more vivid. Jackie lived. She lived through its eruption into her life, spurts of blood and brain which stained that dainty pink and blue suit. The biopic had to fill in what happened in the minutes, hours, days, and years that followed that ghastly 22 seconds in Dallas. To the person whom this event most radically affected. Confronted with her experience of death as the long-term living with its daily impact, I felt the need to imagine the process of Benjamin's action, its immediate effect on him, those around him, and perhaps on us. I turned to Gershom Scholem's story of his friendship with Walter Benjamin. Scholem writes that he only learned of his friend's death on the 26th or 27th of September 1940, on the 8th of November. He learnt it from Hannah Arendt, who had visited Port Boo, but she found no trace of a grave. Scholem reprints a letter from Frau Gurland to her husband, which provides the only firm information we have about Benjamin's self-administered overdose of morphine and the disposal of the body in a grave bought by Frau Gurland, but only for 5 years. No trace of this grave has ever been found. Hannah Arendt went to seek it. Scholem concludes his book with a further paragraph which reads, "Many years later, in the cemetery that Hannah Arendt had seen, a grave with Benjamin's name scrawled on the wooden enclosure was being shown to visitors. The photographs before me clearly indicate that this grave, which is completely isolated and utterly separate from the actual burial sites, is an invention of cemetery attendants, who, in consideration of the number of inquiries, wanted to assure themselves of a tip." I am shocked. Others have obviously felt the same need to get close to the reality of one of the major symbolic deaths of the 20th century. Our desire to do or even satisfy mawkish curiosity might be assuaged by a name scrawled on a piece of wood. Walter Benjamin's almost unknown death and his apocryphal grave was part of a much huger, more terrifying and almost unimaginable collective experience of death. The murder of over 6 million people in what is known in Hebrew as HaShoah, the destruction. Perhaps this death surpasses the limits of representation. Inflicted on the natural body, can it be represented in cultural forms at all by way of a social body, except by fetishizing it as evil, as fascism, or as suffering and tormented memory? In May 1992, my father-in-law, Pavel Blumenzweig, also known as Paul Bryant, died at the age of 79. Not a name curated by collective memory, he was for me, nonetheless, a historic figure, for he was a figure of that history. He escaped the Nazis in Czechoslovakia and survived to die of disease in old age. He lived with the experience of that monumental 20th century death, having to carry with him the knowledge that his own parents did not die of disease, did not die of old age, did not die of an accident, but had been callously destroyed. Old and trusting people did not believe what he told them about the threat against them, because such a threat surpassed all imagination. They were horribly put to death, poisoned, humiliated, they burnt. Death Fugue. Black milk of daybreak, we drink it at sundown, we drink it at noon. In the morning we drink it, at night we drink and we drink it. We dig a grave, in the breezes there one can find. A man lives in the house, he plays with the serpents, he writes, when dusk falls to Germany, your golden hair, Margareta. He writes and steps out of doors, and the stars are flashing. He whistles his pack out, he whistles his Jews out, in earth he has dug grave. He commands us to strike up for the dance. Black milk of daybreak, we drink you at night. We drink in the morning, at noon we drink you, at sundown we drink and we drink you. A man lives in the house, he plays with the serpents, he writes, when the dusk falls to Germany, your golden hair, Margareta, your ashen hair, Shulamit. We dig a grave, in the breezes there one lies unconfined. He calls out, jab deeper into the earth, you lot, you others sing now and play. He grabs at the iron in his back, he waves it, his eyes are blue. Jab deeper, you lot, with your spades, you others play on for the dance. Black milk of daybreak, we drink you at night. We drink you at noon, in the morning we drink you, at sundown we drink and we drink you. A man lives in the house, your hair, Margareta, your ashen hair, Shulamit. He plays with the serpent. He calls out more sweetly, play death. Death is a master from Germany. He calls out more darkly, now stroke your strings. Then as smoke you will rise air. Then a grave you will have in the clouds. There one lies unconfined. Black milk of daybreak, we drink you at night. We drink you at noon. Death is a master from Germany. We drink you at sundown, and in the morning we drink you. Death is a master from Germany. His eyes are blue. He strikes you with leaden bullets. His aim is true. A man lives in the house, your golden hair, Margareta. He sets his pack onto us. He grants us a grave in the air. He plays with the serpents. Death is a master from Germany. Your golden hair, Margareta. Your ashen hair, Shulamit. In the aftermath of his death, as part of the curation of his social body, the collating of his papers, we found a short letter in his files, a letter from the Red Cross, obliquely informed him of that date and precise number of the transport which had carried his parents from Terezin, or Theresienstadt, to Oswiecim, or Auschwitz. It is hard to convey the chill that passed home in rural Yorkshire, in a country in which we still cannot fully imagine our proximity to this horror, as we read the official confirmation that proved the exactitude of the record-keeping that was the feature of the official modernity, the bureaucratic completeness of the attempted murder of European Jewry. My father-in-law survived, and he lived to be stolen from me in 10 days by an undiagnosed cancer. Cancer is a thief. It silently crept upon us and snatched him away. I sat by his hospital bed, and I saw the imminence of death creep over him. Death was a pillow, slowly suffocating a struggling man. It was visible. His body became a biochemical system, poisoned by systemic failure, which his already weakened heart could not withstand. They laid him out in intensive care. We took our leave of him. In death he looked like a great warrior on his funeral bier, for the poison swift in its devastation, and the outer corporeal envelope betrayed no trace of the organic breakdown within. This is the second time cancer has robbed me. My mother died in 1964 when she was 2. Undiagnosed by doctors, her symptoms were considered merely the signs of menopause. She weighed less than 40 pounds at her death. Despite the morphine, she was both horrified and fascinated by what the deadly disease had done to her. Stick-like legs protruded below a distended belly, like some Oxfam victim of famine or an adolescent pregnancy. Protracted death from cancer distorts the relation of skeletons and skins. But here was a further outrageous morphology. The shape which promises life contained the ghastly growth that signaled imminent death. There was something within that natural body which was gnawing away at whatever the social body meant to encase. Humanity, personality. I have never come to terms with this death, for reality was too outrageous. The distortion of the maternal body was too grotesque to allow recovery and re-internalization of the beneficent image of the mother as either the imago of identification or a memory of plenitude and desire. All other traces of her were traumatically cauterized by the final victory of the diseased natural body over all that in life makes the body a social being and of dreams. The only moment of relief from terminal loss occurred when I was to become a mother myself. Naively, I imagined that it would be easy to complete the antidote to death, to have fullness instead of emptiness, presence instead of absence. I miscarried. In that, my first pregnancy, the transitivities of feminine identity, with its oscillations between maternal and infant, between recreating my own mother, reaching out to her again, and imagining the joys of being a child cradled lovingly in the safety of another's body. This created an imaginary realm of comfort, which bound a traumatized past to a healing future. It promised restoration, the experience of maternal plenitude and power through the new life which was developing within the matrix of my own body, a singular space of doubling, of oneness and otherness, where an I and a non-I coexist. But what happens when pain explodes this dream, when instead of life inside this uterine matrix companionship, a death occurs, leading to a parody of birth as the no longer maternal body contracts to rid itself of merely dangerously decaying physical matter. I did not know who was being mourned. In pregnancy, I had once again become the child to be nurtured a second time round through the surrogacy of my own nurturance of my child. I was also my mother. I could give birth to her again, and being given in the female child I was so sure I was carrying another chance to love her better, she would not die through any act of omission on my part. Julia Kristeva asks, who is the subject of gestation? I ask, who is the subject of death. For dying and death annihilates subjectivity. The living are the subjects of death. It happens, but I am not there. I cannot think it, but it happens. Thus death is social, historical, cultural, gendered. These tales are my own feminist narrative about feminine subjectivity and death. I know that these are complexly bound to the issue of the maternal body and my double experience of losing a mother and having been a mother who lost several children in the course of 5 pregnancies. For years, I have been working unsuccessfully on an artwork which originated in 1982 when part of my body died, but I lived to tell the deadly tale. All of us seek to deal with death by prolonging the life of the departed through ritual or memorial. We are encouraged by bereavement counselors to talk about the dead, to keep alive the social body. We will probably consult the family photo album and be haunted by the ghost of Roland Barthes. While I was gazing helplessly at photographs of my own mother, hoping to pierce the utter fixity of the photographic image and reclaim some grain of recognition from its aesthetic frieze, I found Barthes had been elegantly there before me. Or had he? He's writing about a photograph of his mother, aged 5, taken in 1898, in a conservatory or winter garden. In this prefiguration of her adult face, Roland Barthes found the image of his mother. Not a just image, just an image. Show the photograph. The absent image is the heart of the book. She's kept safe from our eyes. She's kept safe for his only. But there are other mothers in the book, and these photographs speak volumes. In the next section of the essay, Barthes tells us about the last period of this 5-year-old child's later life, by which time she has become his mother. She has no name. She has no being in his text except as my mother. He nursed her. He fed her like a mother would her child. The mother became his feminine child. Enfant féminine is the word used, so she's not merely matter-of-factly his offspring. That feminine child is also him, my child, the child within me, the desired space of being a woman child to a woman, rather than a childless son to a dying mother. Only in her helplessness does she give him an intimate access to an experience of transitivity so deeply desired by men, whose masculinity is forged in the trauma of realizing their exclusion from it. The term "my mother" uttered by a woman is not the same as the image evoked in masculine speech. The relations of woman to woman via the maternal body and imago are melancholic, akin to a state of perpetual mourning. When we mourn, we draw back what we invested in an object or person who is lost. In becoming a woman, the mother is the desired object of the female child as well as the figure with which she identifies. There is a negative Oedipal attachment, an attachment to the mother that must be overcome, but that will cause us to mourn, to fall into melancholia, because as a female child we are asked to devalue what we identify with. We're asked to leave behind us part of ourselves. The cure for mourning is to devalue the object, to detach mother. But is this possible or desirable? Femininity is thus condemned to a permanent and incomplete mourning which perpetually betrays its own ambivalences. These can be only worked out dynamically in other spaces and relations, like joining the women's movement, having a child, writing a book, making a film. That is in activity rather than the passivity which masculine death narratives impose on women, dead or alive. In psychoanalysis, another mother-killing narrative is important. Michel Montrelet says women are the ruin of representation because they don't have a stake, something to mortgage to the symbolic. But I think Freud was not really writing about Oedipus and the castration complex. He was thinking about Isaac and the circumcision complex. In contract of sociality and submission to the paternal law is better told in the Bible story of Abraham. Abraham was called by his God to make a sacrifice of his by then only son, the belated first fruit of Sarah's aged womb. The social contract is established when Abraham's one unnameable God lets Abraham off killing his firstborn son with a big knife, displacing the actual sacrifice of the child of Sarah's womb by substituting a symbolic act, the killing of a ram. This will stand as a metaphor for what God actually wanted from Abraham, namely his submission. In a sense, God wanted Abraham's being, which is what we concede to the symbolic, to language, where we find ourselves reformed and displaced through its signifiers. The Genesis narrative concludes with no further discussion of Isaac, named so because he made his mother laugh. It ends with the death of Sarah. It ends with the death of the mother. The maternal process of creating the child is overtaken by the divine paternal act of threatening its life and restoring it, but only to the exclusive lineage of the father and son, which is the only one a phallocentric order can recognize. The Greek version of this mythic material, the Oedipus legend, within which Freud disguised and thus disfigured his understanding of the symbolic contract, binding of Isaac, is much more overtly about sex and desire, and the mother is therefore a much, much more important figure. Unlike Sarah, she does not out of sight, but Jocasta acquires the characteristics of death nonetheless in the figure of the Sphinx, the animal world over which the Greeks imagined that man tried reason and self-recognition alone. Jocasta, the dangerously desired and desiring mother, becomes the figure of death, who can never escape being the lure of masculine. But what of Roland Barthes, the Protestant, not surrounded in childhood with that Greek and the even older pre-Judaic image of the great mother and child that persisted through to Western Catholicism? After recounting his begetting of his feminine self-child and the mortal image of his dying mother, he writes his own suicide note. Once she was dead, I no longer had any reason to attune myself to the progress of the superior life force, the race, the species. My particularity could never again universalize itself, unless utopically by writing, whose project henceforth would become the unique goal of my life. From now on, I could do no more than await my total, undialectical death. That is what I read in the Winter Garden photograph. Art enacts death because it is the compensation for the creativity which allows women this dialectical relation of both self and other, which is the relation of life and death. The philosophers to whom Barthes refers sound pretty local, mostly Parisian, Lacanian, with all that junk about the race and the species, the particular and the individual. It's because they're allowed to get away with such utter banality and abstraction that Barthes can write out such a fantasy, which so clearly delineates the uses and abuses of our creative and maternal bodies as the hidden center, the absent structure of surrogate phallic creativity. I talk about death without too many metaphorical delusions. I want to talk about it in terms of blood, shit, bloating, gas chambers. I want it to be embodied. I want to be able to speak about my mother, her death, my mourning, my dead babies. Those bloodied surgical dishes with the remnants of possible beings, sacks containing almost formed little limbs, who are not my stake in the race, my contribution to the species, but fully formed figurations of my own desire. I do not want my body to be the passage through which men may beget themselves and their progeny. I want it to be the site of a sexually specific and particular subjectivity. I want to be the subject of both gestation and of mourning. In our experience, most things end with death. Your experience? Actors? I'm talking about death. And you've never experienced that. You can't act it. You die 1,000 casual deaths with none of that intensity which squeezes out life, and no blood runs cold anywhere. Because even as you die, you know you'll come back in a different hat. But no one gets up after death. There is no applause. There's only silence and some second-hand clothes. And that's death. The player gets up. "Oh, very good," says Rosencrantz. "Very good. You took me in completely. Didn't he take you in completely? Oh, wonderful. Encore." Thank you. Come, gentlemen. No flattery. It was merely competence. But we have deaths for all occasions and ages. Deaths by suspension, deaths by convulsion, consumption, incision, execution, asphyxiation, malnutrition. Climactic carnage we can do, poison, steel, double deaths by duel. Show it all. Come on, let's show it. Guildenstern, tired, drained, but still on impatience, over the mime. No! No, not for us. It's not like that. Dying isn't romantic, and death is not a game which will soon be over. Death is not anything. Death is not. It's the absence of presence, nothing more. It's the endless time of never coming back. A gap you can't see. And when the wind blows through it, it makes no sound.